Okay, councillors, welcome back, and I'd like to welcome James and Charles, and I'm going to hand the floor over to you guys to just introduce yourselves and the roles you have, and we're in your hands. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman, and yeah, it's a real privilege to be here today. So my name's Charles Ferguson. I'm Head of Farm Source for Fonterra for Canterbury, Tasman and Marlborough. Farm Source is our farmer-facing arm of Fonterra, so I look after all of our farmer-facing activity from just south of Oamaru right through to Golden Bay, and that's about a quarter of Fonterra's milk, and it includes our sustainability advisors, our relationship managers, and our retail network. We've got a pretty cool store that we're very proud of. I think I'm right, just this way. Yeah, I'm pleased I didn't go that way. And I'm joined here by James Cagle. I'll let him introduce himself.
Thanks, Charles. So I'm James Cagle. I know there are a number of you around the table who are familiar with my father. That's fine too. So I'm the Cooperative's Regional Engagement Manager for the South Island. So I look after our external stakeholders like yourselves across the South Island. So very familiar with local government, and I expect to see a number of you at Local Government New Zealand Conference in Wellington in a month's time. We'll get through today first.
Just with that though, will they still have ice creams there?
I do have some sad news on that front. There'll be plenty of coffee and chocolate, but no ice cream.
So look, we've got some material to work through. So we're going to cover off a few Fonterra topics, a little bit about what's going on in Canterbury. Then we're going to touch on some of the challenges that we're having. Anyone who opens the newspaper recently has seen that that Fonterra is having a couple of issues. That we'll touch on those, and then we're going to cover the outlook a little bit, what we're doing around sustainability and our strategy reset. If it's okay, I'd welcome questions throughout. I find that often that helps actually explain the material a little bit better.
Just a little point down on the bottom there, you've got confidential. You are being live streamed, and we can turn it off if you don't want the general public to see this.
This is fine. I think it's a slightly out of date cover. The material that we've got here, I'm fine with that being seen by anyone. So probably what we want to start with is actually a little bit of an outlook about dairy. So from our perspective, the fundamentals of dairy are actually really strong. And if you kind of, for me, there's two sides to that, right? There's a supply side and there's a demand side. But strength for the future for dairy will come from demand. So what you can see, it's a bit difficult. I'm used to only having one screen up when I present actually, but what you can see on these two screens is why we have a really positive outlook, right? So population across the world is growing, and it's actually growing quite significantly. At the same time, you're seeing a bulging middle class, and that middle class is also moving into towns and cities across the world, right? I'm sure that these aren't new trends, right? But these are our forecasts, but we've been seeing this happening for quite a while. And down in the bottom right there is our sort of facts and figures on dairy consumption. So I look at this in two ways, right? If you look at the EU and the level of dairy that Europeans consume, it kind of shows what a potential market size can look like. But then if you look at some of the other smaller parts there with China and Asia, you're already seeing a step up in demand between 2013 and 18. So for us, you add all that up, and what we expect to see is a significant increase in dairy consumption in Asian countries on the back of changing trends, growing income, and people moving into towns. And probably the best live example we've got of that at the moment is pizza consumption in China. So the factory just down the road in Clandeboye, that supplies about half the cheese that goes on pizzas that are consumed in China. And that's grown from almost 0 10 years ago. So that's something, that's something that we have leverage value off, and we see this all across dairy. So I guess, there's a lot of talk about dairy, right? It's not always positive, but actually, when you look at this, right, there's a really positive outlook. And kind of in connection with that, this is where we sit. This is where we sit. So dairy's quite a different sort of game in that most dairy is consumed where it's growing, right? The big blob on the right, that's the amount of milk that's produced around the world every year. The one on the left is the amount that's produced in New Zealand. So on a global scale, New Zealand is actually a relatively small player, when it comes to dairy. But in the middle, that's the amount of milk or dairy that's traded between borders. So, we are a big player, probably, the largest player when it comes to our share of exported. So we're small in relation to the overall milk pool, right? But we are, we're really overweight when it comes to dairy traded. And that's why the dairy auction, which some of you may or may not follow, is such a critical thing for our farmer shareholders and the country as a whole, because it drives the income, but also it's why it's volatile, because we're really sensitive to what's happening with export prices. So that sort of, and that number on the right there, if it's growing at 1.5 to 2% a year, right, that is a huge amount of milk additional milk that's being consumed, and that's what I linked back to the slide before about why we see a really positive outlook for demand for dairy. So in New Zealand, right, this here is actually the mid-Canterbury milk curve. So the way we sort of chop the country up into what we call wards. This is Ward 21, and that runs from the Rakaia River to the Rangitata. So where a lot of your constituents are. And we call it a milk curve because every spring, and Neil will talk to this much better than I will, we calve and then you really ramp up, and then you sort of peak in the South Island around mid to late October, and then you track down and typically finish around May. The reason I put this up is I kind of wanted to show that the season we've just had, which is the green line, was a really, really strong year in Canterbury. It was so strong that we had more milk than we knew what to do with, and that we actually had to start shipping some of it north, back into the North Island. So if you may or may not recall, but last winter was actually pretty favourable, right? And then we had an incredible start to spring. So good winter, fine start to spring, and that you see a whole lot of milk being produced. Equally, in November it actually started to get a bit grey and gloomy, and so we came off a bit quicker than we expected as well. But I suppose the unique thing about the New Zealand industry compared to other parts of the world is that it follows this curve, right? So, it's why we are the most efficient, low-cost dairying country in the world, because we follow a grass curve, but it also is a challenge because our customers demand, they have consistent demand throughout the year.
Would you say a little bit of that would be climate change? We are getting milder winters and milder springs.
Look, I mean, it's hard to say, right? I mean, we certainly we are being impacted by weather events, as you'd see. I think my personal view is that last winter was a one out of the box. That was in Canterbury. That was our best production ever. But the 2 years prior to that were actually weaker than the 2 years before. So I don't know. I mean, climate change for me, I'm not quite sure how it's going to manifest here. But I kind of think, this was it was a good winter.
One thing though to think about, particularly for this mid-Canterbury curve, which you'll be well aware of, is irrigation means farmers here can manage climate impact much more easily. So compare this curve to one we don't have to show you, but say let's take the Waikato for this year. That drop off in about halfway through the season. It was much more pronounced in the Waikato than it was here, because here you had irrigation water to be able to continue to push the pasture.
Yeah, that's right, James. Well, actually, across the country, there was, there was more or less a drought in a number of parts, and the curves in the Taranaki, Waikato, and top of the south are a much more kind of roller coaster type flow on the way down.
I'll just butt in a little bit as lights come on because there's questions for you. If you're
Oh,
happy
sorry.
with if
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
happy with that,
So, 100%. That's yep.
okay, cool.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
So Charles, the area that you define as Mid-Canterbury is absolutely the Ashburton district, so it's
Yep.
all of us. And the graph that you've shown, my understanding is, last time I heard we were the second highest dairy producing district in New Zealand. Do we still have that title?
So what I can tell you with certainty is that Canterbury, Tasman and Marlborough, which is my area, we produce more milk than the Waikato, just gone. So it's the largest region. The wards itself aren't necessarily comparable. But Canterbury, we would, if I lop off the top of the south, we were 10 million kilograms, so about, 0.3% behind the Waikato. So, are we the largest producing region? It's hard to say. What I know is that this milk is produced off a lot less farms than it is. So 25% of the milk down here comes off 12% of the farms.
So the per hectare yield is a lot higher.
Yep. So we might just a few more specifics about what's going on in Canterbury. So I do apologise, a couple of these numbers are a little bit out of date, especially on the sort of contribution there, but the numbers for dairy in Canterbury, right, and obviously quite a fair chunk of that is between the Rakai and the Rangitata are big, right? So we've got about 1,200 dairy farms, 3 major processors, so that's ourselves, Synlait and Westland. We employ over, the industry, right? So that goes right from farm through to supply chain, employs over 7,000 people, and that doesn't take account of the number of suppliers to these businesses that rely on the industry for their income. And I'm sure you guys would see all sorts of economical analysis, and you define it which way, but it is a material contributor to the Canterbury economy. At kind of 2.5 billion a couple of years back, and given where milk prices have been at, that would be higher than that today. And I think that, if I reflect on, I live in Christchurch, right? And, I'll be honest, it doesn't actually get the recognition in town there about what a key contributor to the economy it is. It's just slightly more broadly, I kind of put this up to kind of highlight the difference between the South Island and the North Island. So the South Island compared to the North Island is relatively new in terms of dairying at scale. So South Island roughly has 41-42% of the milk, right, and the balance in the North Island, but obviously it hasn't always been that way. So we've actually had the benefit in the South Island of being able to have a more strategic approach to where we put our plants. So what you can see there is quite a nice spacing between the plants in the South Island, and that gives us a lot of benefit in terms of being able to scale up a plant and have quite a large collection area and really drive efficiency. In the North Island, you can see it gets a little bit more crowded. And back in the day, each factory was an individual co-op, right? And so Fonterra was formed by these co-ops, coming together over time. So quite a difference, south to north. And if you look at the kind of the economic contributions, I'm not sure if we've got a total on there, but it's a huge, I spoke about how big a contributor was to Canterbury. It's a really, really key contributor to all areas. And a lot of those regions are really, they are struggling a bit. So yes, it's very big in rural New Zealand. As far as sort of farmers' back pockets go, this graph here takes us back to 2009, kind of roughly a 10-year, slightly over time frame, and it talks to the income the majority of our farmers have had. So we often, we always talk about the 2 years looking back. We talk about the 840 year and we talk about the 390 year. So that was 2014 being the 840 and 2016 being the 390. And it's funny, it's one of these ones, careful what you wish for, right? Because if you ask it, and Neil, give me a whack around the ears here, but if you ask a dairy farmer, 840, it would, bring it on. But actually, what that did is that combined with a few other things actually drove a lot of supply onto the market. So other areas of the world who don't follow the grass curve, they are able to really push their production, right? So you saw a lot of milk come on, you saw some favourable weather, and you saw some markets close, and that's what drove those 2 really low years. So back in 2016-17, I'd give this talk and I'd talk about volatility, and what you can see from 2009 is that's pretty volatile, yeah? But since sort of 2017, we're now into our 4th year forecasting a $6 plus payout. And so actually sort of, yes, it is a bit volatile, but it's really settled down a little bit. The outlook, we've got a dollar range on our outlook, so we've got a midpoint of 675. But one thing to call out here is that I think what we're seeing out there when we work with our farmers is that on-farm costs are going up. So a $6 plus payout, which used to kind of be it's Christmas, isn't quite what it was. And at the same time, banks are really putting the pressure on. Banks have got their own challenges, and so a lot of our farmers are really feeling it from the bank as well.
At this stage, world grain price, the world looks like it's slightly short of grain. Australia's importing grain at the moment. That's going to have an influence, a big influence on those 2 short payouts with a change from not producing ethanol in America.
Yep.
So grain has as much influence on as what the grass is.
Yep. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess maybe to round this slide out, it hasn't quite come through on the final bar, but what you can see is the green, which is our dividend or our return or the way we're actually performing in the business, has been getting smaller, all right? And that's what I want to get to. If we go to the next slide, we're going through, Fonterra's going through a period of intense change right now. Our financial performance, so that's the return our farmers get on their share, just simply isn't good enough. Any of you in the room who own Fonterra shares will be acutely aware of the price they are at the moment, and so that has to improve. So I wanted to just spend just a little bit of time talking through what our priorities at Fonterra are. So we've been on a bit of a bumpy road, right? It started about this time last year. So we've had a new chief executive, a new chairman, and they presented our annual result in September last year, right? So we run a 31 July balance date, and they had the first set of numbers they came out with were one of the weakest we've ever presented. It was our first ever loss. So what you see on the left there was the plan that we came out with, which is this is more or less our right now plan. So we had to reduce our debt. We wanted to bring our controllables back down, and that we wanted to have more accurate forecasting. So one thing we want to change at Fonterra is some of it is reasonable, some of it isn't, but we've often said things and not necessarily come back and done them. So on the left here, on the left over there, that's what we said, and on the right here is what we've done about it. So you would have, the question before about ice cream. So yeah, there's no more ice cream. So that's been sold to a dedicated ice cream company that's owned offshore. We're pleased with the purchaser. It's much better off for Tip Top that it's gone to an ice cream company rather than a private equity sort of joint. So we feel that Tip Top actually has a really strong future. Finally, just on Tip Top, it's only been owned by Fonterra since 2001. It was actually Australian owned before that. So while it's a love mark, you know, there's a little bit of background there. We're also selling another asset called DFE Pharma. So that's a business that's a joint venture with a Dutch cooperative, and it makes pharmaceutical grade lactose. So, you know, when you have a Nurofen or your drug of choice, I kind of, you know, there's actually very, very small amounts of pharmaceutical in the pill, and the kind of packing, that's actually lactose, which we produce in Taranaki and is manufactured at a factory up there. But, you know, our debt's too high, and so therefore we're really wanting to focus, and that business uses relatively small amounts of milk, right, and it is starting to track in a different sort of slightly non-dairy direction. So for us, great opportunity to generate some cash, bring the debt down, and really focus on strategy. There's a couple of other things which I'll talk about a bit more as we track down, and I'm sure if I go back to basics, I'm sure you've all been involved with businesses, and when you're under pressure from your debt, you really have to focus on what you can control. And so CapEx and operating expenses are two of those examples, and Miles Hurrell, my boss, he is white hot on both of those. So we've pulled CapEx down 200 mil, and we've reduced our OPEX by 73, and this is year to date. So it'll be down more than that by the end of the year. And as far as more accurate forecasting goes, yeah, I think they're ruining the day. They said more accurate forecasting. I think it's more transparency. So, and again, you know, some memories are often a bit short, but what I've seen is that our farmers and our unit holders are getting a more regular, transparent update of what's going on. So we're quicker to adjust the milk price. We're being more transparent about what it takes to hit our earnings numbers, and if we're not going to meet them, then we're acting. So that was the plan, and that's what we're doing about it. So we are executing against it. But and I won't labour this one because it's a bit busy, but the reason being here is that if the key, this is our Q3 numbers year to date, there's a lot of red on here, yeah? So they are really big numbers. So revenue of 15 billion, right, off the back of nearly 17 billion litres of milk. But we are not performing as well as we performed last year, and last year wasn't a particularly good year either. So this is a quote from our chairman. So there will be fundamental change. We're taking a hard look at our end-to-end business, where we can win in the world, and the products where we have a real competitive advantage. There are no sacred cows. And I think that, yeah, and I suppose the Tip Top, you know, there is a huge amount of kind of focus on that from our shareholder base, and a bell curve of views of whether it was the right thing to do or not. But, you know, that for me shows the importance of the decisions we have to make. So I might just touch a bit about where we're going. So in September, our messaging was our strategy was all right, execution has let us down. We're now in a place where we're completely resetting the strategy. So our language previously was to be a globally competitive co-op, but what we want to be now is a New Zealand co-op that's globally competitive. So the subtlety there is that we're not going to keep growing offshore. You know, we're going to take our milk to the world from here. We're going to put sustainability much more at the heart, and that's for a whole variety of reasons, and it covers environmental, social and economic. And one, that's because Fonterra is an intergenerational business, right? So we've released our new purpose, which is our co-op empowering people to create goodness for generations. And, you know, that generational piece, right, is a lot of our farmers talk about how they want to leave the land better than how they've, you know, how it came to them, and that it's about their children. And sustainability is going to be key to deliver that. And then there's some more focus on how we create value from the milk. So, you kind of hear these commentators about, you know, oh, it's just powder and it's a commodity. There's actually a huge amount of value that's created by doing that, and I kind of pointed out some of those, you know, economic contribution figures. But we have probably missed the boat a little bit on making more of our New Zealand story, our providence, our heritage, and the kind of fantastic way that our animals are cared for out there as well. So that's, you know, that's not a snap of the finger, right? But it is different from where we've been. But just to kind of ratchet up the pressure on the business a bit more, we are taking a really hard look at more investments. So some of you may have heard we've got a farming operation in China. So we've got, I want to say 40,000 cows up there, thereabouts. And it was part of our Chinese strategy to ensure that we were kind of meeting what was our expectations of Beijing. But we feel we're now at a position in China where we have a fully integrated business. We're really committed. We've got strong brands that we can actually review what we do with our farms in China. And we also have a joint venture with Nestle in South America. And, you know, it's sort of, I hope, you know, I'll be, you know, I'll give my view here, right? So we're not possibly the best people to really make a go of it in Brazil, right? You know, we're not Brazilians, right? That market is subject to completely different things. Asia is really where we see our future growth, right? And I guess this is what, you know, where we are now is that no sacred cows, right? Because a joint venture with Nestle. Nestle is our largest customer, right? For us to be looking at that shows that we're really serious about what we're up to. And just while we're on this slide, you know, Aussie is, you know, a basket case as far as the dairy industry goes. So too much stainless steel, so too much capacity and not enough milk, people exiting, and a kind of environment where you see what happens if a country loses its dairy co-op, when there's fighting for milk and in the end farmers lose. And in the case of this, it's meant we're having to close one of our sites. So while we're waiting for the reset, we are still moving, right? So we're reviewing those assets, but we've also launched what's called the cooperative difference, which is our approach to end-to-end sustainability. So I might just get you to key out. So we've got 5 key aspects to this, right? So ultimately, it's about producing quality milk that we can realise value for. So if we start at the left, right, this is kind of trying to guide our farmers for what we need from them now and into the future. So we need our farmers engaged with the co-op, right? As I'm sure you know in your organisation, if you don't have the support of your stakeholders, then you've got a problem, all right? We have to improve what's happening in the environment, right? And we're going to take a much harder line about what that means. In Canterbury, right, in the short term, we're actually in a good space. The regulatory framework here is the sort of highest in the country. So other parts of the country, you know, they're going to be under a lot of pressure here. We feel that, you know, it's critical that animals are cared for, right? But our customers also expect that, and we're going to track that much more closely. Milk, which is our bread and butter, but we're also going to have a slightly higher focus on people as well. If we come back to the number of people who are involved in dairy, right? And, you know, you do hear some quite sort of horrible stories out there, and that can go right from on-farm accommodation through to health and safety on-farm as well. And for us, we often talk about, are we behind the farm gate or not, right? You know, for us to maintain our strength for generations, we feel that we need to get a little bit behind the farm gate, but not too far, Neil. And the other thing is that we are focusing much more on R&D and science and technology. So this slide, we don't need to go through it in detail, but it shows some of the trends that we see and some of our focuses from a science and technology point of view. So we've got the world-class dairy research and development centre in Palmerston North. We invest roughly 80 to 100 million a year in R&D. And the interesting thing about R&D, it's difficult to say about what it's absolutely doing today. But if you step back, I spoke about mozzarella before. That mozzarella was developed in Palmerston North to take the sort of processing time for mozz, down to a very, very short time frame. And there's a heap of examples out there. I wanted to bring out instant cheese here, but it wasn't quite going to work. So making cheese out of milk powder instantly just with some hot water, right? And that taps into our markets where refrigeration is an issue. And probably the other thing, just in the green there down the bottom, Fonterra is not going to be the next Kodak, yeah? So we have got eyes wide open to some of the risks that are coming, and, I think ignore those at your peril, right? We've made some very small investments in non-dairy companies offshore. We don't see it as a material threat at this point, but we're keeping a very close eye on it. So that was kind of what I wanted to cover.
Thank you. And I'll just ask our Chief Executive if you'd mind just flicking the lights on, just to make sure no one's dozed off in the meantime. Cool. That's bright. Okay, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation, Charles. I guess my first question is to better understand the Ashburton district, and you made mention before that there are 12% of the farms producing 20% of the milk, and I know that in regards to production, it's being processed outside of our district.
Yep.
And we look at envy, and if there is surplus steel in Australia and you are looking to acquire it and put it somewhere, look no further is all I can say.
All right.
But I guess to better understand what's happening in our district, because we are unfortunately aware of Mycoplasma bovis. We're aware of the fact that we have the title of too many cases, and I am also aware that testing's being done at Fonterra, so perhaps you could help us understand the biosecurity and what part you play in that, and how Dairy NZ and Fonterra work together on solving this.
Yeah, sure. So I was heavily involved in Mycoplasma, not so much recently, but at the start. Right at the start, I'll be honest, it was kind of, no one really knew what was going on. So we stepped in and played a big role with getting the first round of what's called red milk testing underway. And so I think some of you may have been there. It was a pretty big meeting in Ashburton where we handed out a whole heap of chili bins. So what we have done is we have assisted the effort where it makes most sense. So doing something on scale, like getting 12,000 chili bins into a dairy farmer's hands, right? We also work closely behind the scenes on the effort, so our head vet and his team partner up with MPI, and we've done a lot of the communication as well. I think that, if I can speak freely, we haven't necessarily been able to offer as much support as we'd like, and that's because we kind of seem to get stuck in this quagmire of privacy and, you're not, if a farmer wants you to help, then they'll ask, and whereas, we would prefer to be proactive. From a biosecurity point of view, the risks are very low. So to get really specific for a moment, if you are an IP or an RP, which I'm sure those are terms that everyone's familiar with, you go on to last collection, and the tanker goes through some additional cleaning, once the milk's been dropped off. And then, we're providing support. So, for example, if you're a winter milk farmer, we pay our winter milkers more, right? But they're contracts, so we will, if you're having to be depopulated, we'll keep the winter milk contract available should you want to step back, into that. But, for me, it hasn't, I would have liked to have done more, right? I feel that, we as agriculture, just through the complexities of the response, and I'll be honest, at times, it being a little bit of a mess, we haven't been able to do as much as we'd like.
Supplementary, just to let you know, a few of us were at local government, rural and provincial recently, and I know that sometimes farmers feel like they're not being recognised for the good work that they're doing in the environmental space, and congratulations for Fonterra for pushing that message as well. But there was a statement made by the Associate Minister of Finance, also leader of the Green Party, James Shaw, who made the statement that if he was to give awards to any organisation who had done the most for sustainability in the last year, that organisation would be Dairy NZ for educating their members. So to the sector, congratulations.
Yep.
Okay, do we have any further questions at all? Cool. If not, thank you very, very much, gentlemen. Pleasure to see you here, and
Cool.
wish you well.
I'll just endeavour to get some more district level statistics for you by July, because I know you'll want them. So
Excellent.
May I just ask one question in regards to the environmental plantings that are done? My understanding is that there are some planting projects happening in other districts. Are there any happening in this district? And if not, why? And how can we jump into that?
there aren't right now. We just 2 weeks ago I was at an opening for a large fish barrier project, one district to your north. And the likely next place we wanted to do something with Environment Canterbury is down here in Hinds. The staff member we have principally engaged in that activity is onto his 4th week with us. So getting up to speed, but and because we're heading into the end of the financial year, just trying to get some contractual issues dealt with in terms of funding arrangements. But yeah, look, you're absolutely you're next off the rank, and probably should be able to talk to you again more about it in July again.
So just see, that's a factory and plants. It's been a good visit. Thank you.
It's lucky we've appointed an economic development officer to handle all this.
Absolutely. And just on that point, so our roads have a lot of vehicle movements because we produce a lot of milk, and I understand that in other districts you have arrangements with some of the councils to better understand the road movements, the maintenance and reporting. Wondering what we've developed in our district and how we're working with you.
Short answer is probably not as much as we could compared to other districts, and happy to take that conversation offline with the Chief Executive.
Cool. Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Charles, the environmental is getting really hot out there, and the farmers are doing a lot of work on it. Not only dairy farmers, but a lot of farmers all over New Zealand, and it's ramping up, and they're spending quite a bit of money on it. And it's their own money they're spending on it to meet the targets that the regional councils are putting on them. And that's all good. They don't begrudge it. They're doing it. They're not getting any recognition for it, which I think one of the slides was up there. There's no recognition for it yet, which it has to probably come in at some stage. So the environmental is important. The morale out there with farmers, and farmers, not just dairy farmers, but most farmers, is very low. They're sick and tired, I suppose, of doing all this environmental. They're not sick and tired of doing the environmental. They're doing that, but getting no recognition for it. They're feeling like they're getting just a kick in the guts for the hard work they're doing. They're getting no pats on the back or anything from the, I'll use the word townies. The other people, probably Ashburton District is not one of those, but they know what's going on. They recognise it. Now we've got the greenhouse gas thing coming in, when the government's having a go at them, the farmers, as in no recognition for the grasses you grow, the shelter belts you've got for the trees. It's all one side of the equation. So that's not being recognised, and it's coming from the government now that the cows are to blame, and the cows and the sheep and the animals for the greenhouse gases. They probably are, but they're a small part of the equation. So what is Fonterra doing to get on the side of the farmers, and if they get on the side of the dairy farm, they're going to get on the side of the other farmers too, who are not Fonterra suppliers or even sheep or beef farmers, to get the word out there that these farmers are doing okay and they're doing better. Give them some recognition for what they're doing, because they need it.
So, yeah, I mean, Neil, I do agree about the morale. I also think financial pressure is in there as well. So if I can be specific about some of the things we're doing, so we've run a program called Open Gates, which is where we have got, it was in November that we ran it, it was second year in a row, where we identify dairy farms across the country and we invite people in to see what's going on. Those were really, really well attended, right? We do lobby. We work. James was in Wellington yesterday, actually working with officials on the DERA, the DERA legislation. But from a Fonterra perspective, we lobby for the benefit of the co-op, right? Which has got a variety of things. So it's shareholder, but it's also milk, it's access to market, it's right to operate in New Zealand. So I don't, and I know you're a shareholder, I don't think you would want Fonterra to be in the same role as, say, Feds is, right? Which for me, Feds or Dairy NZ is much more, squarely focused on the farmer, whereas Fonterra, we have to think about, creating value for your milk. So typically, on these issues, our farmers might see us as being a little bit soft around the edges, right? Or not as aggressive as some of the things you're seeing coming out from some of the other industry bodies out there. But when an issue comes up, we work right through it, we think about our stakeholders, and then we come right back and focus on, well, actually, it's critical that we continue to pay our farmers the most for their milk for the long term. So I kind of think that, there is a lot going on. The other thing that we're doing is we're ramping up how we can help farmers. So we've doubled the size of our sustainable dairy advisors. We provide FEPs free of charge, right? And we work, behind the scenes with irrigation companies as well. And I suppose the slide that we built up is the way that we are going to reward and recognise farmers into the future. And probably the final thing is we're going to be much harder on the bottom 5%, because I do feel the bottom 5% casts a shadow over the other 95% who do a bloody good job. And we're going to take a much harder line with them.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you, gentlemen.
Cool. Thank you.